It's really not a well-kept secret at this point that Happy Tree Friends is a violent and gruesome show. It's also well known by now that all of its characters are subjected to multiple deaths across the series, but which ones are the most brutal? I'm Kifinosi with Wicked Binge, and these are Happy Tree Friends deaths, gruesome to most gruesome. Starting this absolute bloodbath is Mime burning from the inside out. In double whammy, Flippy's trying to get some treatment for his PTSD, and unfortunately, it gets triggered by accident by smelling smoke and seeing Mime breathe fire. Because of this, Flippy turns into Flickpy and forces Mime to chug a bottle of gasoline he was using for his breathing fire trick, get a bow and arrow by killing Sniffles for it, and then lighting the arrow before hitting Mime in the chest with it. This results in his insides being lit on fire, with these flames escaping his mouth and eye sockets as he struggles in vain before finally exploding from the flames somehow. Getting 4th degree burns is already really painful, but having these flames lit up inside you, it's another level of pain. Popping it over to Pop's place, next up is the stairway to death. A vicious cycle is one of the few Halloween episodes for this show, with them being deadlier than usual and paying tribute to horror movies. In A Vicious Cycle, after getting shocked by lightning, Flickpy ends up pulling a Chucky and possesses a tricycle. Not even this new state can keep him down though, as he's able to still kill others, a la Christine the Killer Car, with Pop being one of the victims. After getting pushed down some stairs by Tricycle Flickpy, Pop ends up trembling down the stairs, with each step knocking a bone out of his body, already bad, but then he ends up getting electrocuted by a breaker panel. So he dies by electrocution, right? Somehow no! It's so shocking and painful that Pop's head explodes and pops off of his body. Oh, pops off. Okay, that must be where his name is from. Next, we have the Mole, having a barrel of laughs in his barrel of death. Mole is an animal that doesn't get many deaths, usually sharing them with other animals. However, he still has some shocking solo deaths, like here. False Alarm has Nutty getting over his candy addiction, only for Lifty and Shifty to instead give him a video game addiction, with Nutty seeing everything as a game, from stealing cars like GTA to even playing Tetris with Petunia's organs. This culminates at the ending with a flaming barrel being launched onto Mole as he's stuck inside, rolling around in it. Nutty imagines this as Donkey Kong, and after jumping over the barrel, he grabs a hammer and smashes it to bits, with Mole also getting smashed to bits as his brain gets more and more destroyed. Next up to the slaughterhouse, or as I call it, the Slaughter House, is Lammy with a death she can't handle. Lammy was a character added late into the series after a character poll made to introduce a new member to the series was created. As such, she was rarely used and had fewer deaths. However, there is one pretty nasty death that is unique to her. All work and no play has Lumpy demolishing an old playground with rundown equipment, with Lumpy going on a lunch break as some of the residents come in to play on these dangerous playground attractions that anyone with eyes could see as troubling. Some days, Lumpy is the one causing trouble and pain, and other days, he's legitimately pretty good, like here. Lammy tries the monkey bars, but one bar comes loose and falls right into her head. It not only goes right through her head from ear to ear, but it gets there by going right through the top of her head. To make matters even worse, she's still alive and only dies once she gets impaled by some shards of cement. From a character with few deaths to one with many. Next is Giggles riding a staircase railing of pain. Home is where the hurt is, has Lumpy doing what he does best, and ends up messing up the blueprints for Giggles' new home. This results in the deaths of everyone here in her new death trap of a house. Giggles is done in by riding down a long staircase railing, first getting her head smacked by boards and wall decor and getting a black eye. She then gets worse as she ends up riding on some nails, getting shredded to the point that her body is almost split in half, only held together by her head. It's time for some death on the high seas, with Russell doing some improv water skiing. Idle curiosity revolves around the idol, which causes misfortune. With Sniffles taking it from an ancient civilization, his party members die off as he takes his ship back to shore. Once the idol crosses paths with Russell as he swabs the deck, his peg legs get stuck into wooden planks. A minor inconvenience, but when he's stuck in the path of a hook ready to scoop out his insides like the bad ending of FNAF's sister location, it becomes much more painful. Knocked off the ship and only holding on by his intestine, he's forced to dodge coral reefs and even gets set on fire at one point before it finally stops. However, it stops only because the ship sinks, meaning that he's forced to drown to death after surviving all of that. Truly a cruel twist of fate for this sea captain. Something sweet is coming up, with Toothy experiencing a sight for sore eyes. Normally, Nutty is the one whose candy obsession causes his downfall, but Eye Candy was particularly cruel to Toothy, all because he wanted a lollipop. After tripping and getting his lollipop stuck inside of his eye, he manages to pry it out, inadvertently launching his eyeball and optic nerve all around a tree branch, so forced to climb up to get it down, a bird ends up pecking at his eye, causing him more pain as he falls off, hanging on by his optic nerve, even grabbing at it and causing himself more pain. Finally ending the pain, his eye and optic nerve being tied up and stuck causes his brain to get forced out of his eye socket, forcing his other eye out before Toothy literally drops dead. Incredibly painful and brutal, but hey, it won a prize at the Annecy Film Festival in France. Never say Toothy didn't suffer for his art. Next up, Lifty's on the menu. Meet Me for Lunch is one of the earlier episodes of the series, but it still showed that this crew knew how to create graphic deaths all the way back then. Finding their fridge empty, Lifty and Shifty do what they do best, and that's stealing. Running out of a butcher shop with a lot of meat, they get forced back in after some sausage links recoil from being caught on a sliding door. Shifty gets grounded into sausage links quickly, but Lifty gets it worse. First, he gets stabbed with several falling tools, pinning him down with his legs and an arm stuck. Then it's revealed that he's stuck to a meat grinder, meaning that he's forced to get sliced till he dies, with each slice adding more and more pain. Not only is there the obvious physical trauma from this, but the mental trauma from realizing you're stuck there without any way out is just as big. This is an easy way for you to lose your appetite. It worked for me. For another character with a small death count, we have Crow Marmot experiencing history's worst stomachache. Most of the time, Crow Marmot is stuck inside his ice cube, so we can't truly know what he's thinking. However, Dinosaur Days has him becoming a true caveman, just looking for a meal. After getting attacked by an angry dinosaur he tried to eat, he gets his stomach torn at, with his organs dropping out as he tries to keep them all inside of himself. However, when looking for something to swing across a gap, he tears out more of his intestines to use as a makeshift vine, which works until a pterodactyl snatches him from the sky. Given how his intestine vine led to him swinging into the mouth of a pterodactyl, we're letting that be part of the reason why Crow Marmot died. Given how he was still alive inside of its mouth until the pterodactyl crushed him with its mouth and fed him to its babies, it's just another reason to be grateful for the meteor destroying all the dinosaurs. Everyone F's in the comments for Flippy/Flickpy, who became undead brain food. Remains to be Seen is another Halloween episode from the series, which basically gives the show a green light to get even darker than usual. And here is no exception, granting us one of the few Flippy deaths this series has. After getting triggered once again thanks to his truck backfiring, Flickpy ends up driving into a bunch of trick-or-treaters, killing them all alongside himself. However, thanks to his truck transporting some radioactive waste, all of these dead residents come back as zombies, Flickpy included. While successful in using a lawnmower to keep them down at first, zombie Flickpy chomps off Lumpy's left hand, forcing him to retreat and replace it with something else. Instead of going the Ash Williams route by turning it into a chainsaw, he replaces it with a leaf blower. It may look stupid, but if it works, then it's not stupid, right? And Lumpy's leaf blower arm does work, inflating zombie Flickpy's brain and stretching it out till it's ready to pop like freaking Jiffy Pop. As the other zombies start to surround him, one bite by Toothy causes his brain to explode, finally putting them all down for good, including zombie Flickpy, of course. Even when he dies, Flippy's death is bloody and bigger than the others. For the other member of the Lifty-Shifty duo, we have Shifty, milked for all his worth. Shifty ends up causing a good number of deaths by betraying Lifty and getting into more trouble, leading to his death. Milkin' It has one such instance, with Lifty and Shifty stealing a cow and making a grand escape on their hot air balloon. However, during their attempts to get off the ground, Shifty tosses Lifty out of the hot air balloon to reduce its weight to escape the electric wires. It's not over though, as he ends up jumping up and down too much in celebration, and then he gets trapped in the basket of his ride. It gets worse once the ride hits a windmill, with his lower body getting shredded open. His spine gets caught in it, and while still alive, gets his spine stretched out as far as it possibly can before finally letting go of the cow on accident and getting wrapped all around the windmill before dying. Despite this being a very shocking, drawn out, and disturbing death, it's hard to argue against this one maybe being deserved for once. After causing so many deaths, be it on purpose or accident, it's Lumpy's time to be placed on the chopping block with a deserted death. Yes, out on a limb is arguably worse for Lumpy, having to cut off his leg only for it to be the wrong leg, but since he survives it, it doesn't count for this list. Just Desert is an episode that stars Lumpy being lost in the desert with antics that lead to him dying, so that's what's being counted here. After being stranded in the desert for long enough, Lumpy gets dehydrated. Soon enough, he spots an oasis for him to jump into and drink, even brushing his teeth with its water. Of course, though, this is only a mirage. Not only did brushing his teeth with sand cause him to get his gums bleeding, but he even lost teeth from the ordeal. It gets worse once some vultures take notice of Lumpy's precarious situation and go down to pick him up. His lower body is stuck in the sand, meaning that he can't escape until the vultures pull off and eat enough of him for him to yank himself away from his lower body and finally be free. Even then, though, a vulture still chases him to eat away at Lumpy's body. And finally, he's killed off by a tornado blowing into the desert and stripping him down to just a skull to decorate the desert with. Overall, it was a horrible time for Lumpy. The desert was coarse and rough, and his blood went everywhere. For a particularly nutty death, Nutty has a run-in with a nasty jawbreaker. As the star in Chew Said a Mouthful, Nutty's obsession with candy leads him to try to chew down on a jawbreaker. However, not realizing that jawbreakers were meant for sucking on and not biting, imagine that, he gets his entire lower jaw broken, forcing him to be trapped in wires with his mouth getting sealed shut. Trying still to force a jawbreaker inside, he ends up accidentally biting his tongue off, forcing him to cut his wires, letting his jaw drop and bleed again. Now stuck with a screwed-on metallic headpiece, he chases after his jawbreaker still, even after stealing a patient who has his jawbreaker in his eye. This leads to him being trapped at a junkyard with a giant metallic magnet yanking off his headpiece, causing his jaw to get ripped off before the car he was standing on gets yanked up to crush Nutty against the car and the magnet. However, he's still alive, trying to get one last lick at the jawbreaker before it gets crushed alongside himself. It's a series of deaths brought on by his greed and candy-hungry nature.
How can something so bad taste so good?
Yeah, I reckon this episode and Nutty's death would put the Eds off of Jawbreakers for a while. Maybe Sarah had the right idea about wanting fudge instead of a Jawbreaker. Heroically giving us a death to add to the list, we have Splendid finding his kryptonite. This is Splendid's only true solo death, and thankfully, it's just as disturbing as any other death here. Gems the Breaks features Lifty and Shifty discovering Splendid's secret weakness, crypto nut. After literally frying the thieves alive from space with binoculars and heat vision, Splendid can approach the kryptonite safely in a radiation suit, crush it, and triumphantly take his helmet off to blow it away. Hopefully no wind comes to blow it back into his face, and the wind comes to blow it back. Okay, that's fair. Shocker. This leads to him pretty much suffering radiation poisoning with his skin and even nose peeling off. This leads to him puking up so much that he tries to hold it back, only for his cheeks to give way and make him explode. This may be Splendid's only solo death, but it's a super solo death. With one fatal dance move, Disco Bear gets a place this high up here with enough pain to back it up. Put Your Back Into It features the longest time a character is suffering, with Disco Bear's exercise causing his eye to pop out and his spine to push out of his back. Instead of getting this injury to a hospital, he pulls a move that would make Lumpy on his worst day question his sanity by just tying it up with a medical bandage at his house before continuing on with his day. After screaming at the pain his exposed spine causes him when showering, cooking, and even reading in bed, he still prioritizes showing off to Giggles and Petunia on the beach. For his legendary intelligence leading him here, his reward is a dog mistaking his spine for a bone that was thrown, causing even more trouble for Disco Bear. Russell ends up attaching a fishing hook to Disco Bear's spine after performing a cast, forcing the dog and Russell to play tug of war for Disco Bear's body before it finally breaks, with Russell fishing up Disco Bear's head and spine. In the end, this is cooked up into a meal for a date with Giggles. We can't tell what's worse though. The fact that Disco Bear's been cooked after everything that happened, or the fact that this meal will leave Russell starved, because Disco Bear certainly doesn't have a brain for them to eat after what we saw in this episode. With him being as dim-witted as he is here, he deserved this death, in a way. For a death that certainly wasn't deserved, Cub is now sent to a watery grave. Yeah, we'll admit that And the Kitchen Sink is arguably worse for Cub overall, but since Cub somehow survives and lives happily for a bit in the sink with his lower half removed completely and only really dies by drowning relatively quickly, that just barely avoids the list. Water Way to Go, meanwhile, has drowning with a lot more pain to it. After Pop tries his best to give Cub a fun day at the beach, he ends up giving Cub some ice cream after burying him up to his head, only for the tide to come in with Cub being stuck underwater. To Pop's credit, he immediately goes out to find Cub in the sea, seeing his hat in the ocean and thinking that he got swept away. The problem is that Cub was underneath him the whole time, stuck in the sand underwater, with Pop pushing a giant boat over his face, disfiguring him before ripping his face apart with a propeller. It's this kind of dark and cruel twist of irony that pushes this series and its cruelest deaths from funny to tragic. The fact that this was at least quicker than other deaths is what saved this from being higher up. For our fifth worst death in the show, give a hand to Handy with the class glass act. He kind of needs a hand or two, actually. Shard at work pretty much has it out for Handy from the word go. Unable to unscrew a light bulb, he instead tries to use his mouth, accidentally knocking the ladder he was on and the box of light bulbs down onto the ground, creating a minefield of glass below him. Now, even worse, his mouth bites down too hard, breaking it and covering his mouth in glass shards, making his mouth bleed as he falls onto the floor with some glass shards sticking into his body. Trying to reach a medical kit, he steps into a glass shard, piercing his foot, making him stumble, and then he falls into a wall, knocking a fishbowl onto his head, forcing him to slowly drown. In a last-ditch attempt to get it off of his head before he drowns to death, Handy knocks the fishbowl stuck on his head against a wall over and over again, dropping items onto his head, causing him to lose consciousness and die. For anyone particularly not a fan of glass cutting your body, this episode would be torturous for you. Just missing the top three, we have Cuddles experiencing some grave matters. Can't Stop Coffin is yet another Halloween episode, yet this time, it's an original torture fest for Cuddles, with only one scene where Cuddles is drowning being based on the Shelley Winters scene in Poseidon Adventures, allegedly. Those blurbs aren't the most trustworthy sources at times. Anyway, a baseball game is interrupted by Crow Marmot tossing the ball over the fence. Cuddles goes after it, only to accidentally fall into a coffin, getting buried alive by an oblivious Lumpy. Getting stuck in the dark, Cuddles frantically scratches at the lid only to light a match to see that his fingers have been reduced to bones. This only gets worse once the match sets the coffin on fire, cooking him alive. Thankfully, Lumpy's obliviousness actually helps out now as he waters the grave that he'd once buried. Why? Not even Lumpy knows. He forgot why after doing so. Unfortunately, he watered the grave too much, leading to Cuddles drowning for a bit. The coffin is finally broken by, once again, Lumpy driving in reverse in his truck onto the wet gravesite, getting stuck as Lumpy's truck slowly sinks as he tries to drive off. The tire eventually meets Cuddles' face, destroying his face and knocking an eye out. Even after all of that, he's still alive as he tries to crawl away, only to finally die once Lumpy's truck falls onto him. With so many phobias being portrayed here, and Cuddles dealing with them one after another, it's the most disturbing Halloween episode this series gave us. For our third most gruesome death, we have Flaky going through an avalanche of pain. Skia, Wouldn't Wanna Be Ya, is an episode that, after seeing it, definitely makes us glad that we're not Flaky. After Disco Bear pushes her onto a ski lift, she's sent up to the top of a hill that's pretty much in outer space, accidentally stepping onto a board with a nail that came out of nowhere. She has to ski down the mountain with it impaling her foot. She tries to slow down by holding onto a branch, but that only causes her arm to get dislodged and loose, adding to the pain. Once seeing how badly damaged her foot became, she screams in pain, causing an avalanche, and in one of the show's biggest and cruelest twists of fate, since her original foot is so horribly disfigured, she's forced to step onto the nail with her other foot to properly use it as a board to skate to safety. She's practically reduced to crying as she accepts her fate, willingly puncturing her other foot to survive. Even then, this still does nothing to save her as she's launched from a stump through a chain gate fence, getting her body sliced into cubes as she falls apart in front of Disco Bear's cabin. Given how she's the most cautious one of the group and is aware of how Flippy is prone to flying off the handle in without a hitch, it's very likely that Flaky still remembers this death, and with how traumatizing it was just to watch, one can only imagine how and why she's still staying in this town that attracts death like treasure attracts Lifty and Shifty. Reaching our silver medal, we have Petunia losing it with a very close shave. Fair warning, this entry involves Petunia self-harming, and it's so disturbing to see that this death and episode were pulled from YouTube, a feat no other episode has, so if you just want to skip to the last entry or leave the video altogether, we wouldn't blame you. For anyone still watching, buckle up. Wishy-Washy has Petunia's OCD getting the better of her. After Lumpy dies trying to fix Petunia's water problem in another pretty horrific showing, Petunia, shocked by this, falls into the dirty water filling her basement. Trying to get cleaned off, she tries turning on some water to wash her hands, only for said water to be already contaminated, making her hands red from washing too much. Not giving up, she first uses a brush before upgrading to steel wool, and rubbing it so hard against her body, her skin starts to peel away. After finding a potato peeler, Petunia's mind breaks and she starts to use it to scrape the gunk off of her body. However, predictably, she just ends up peeling off her skin. Not caring at this point and consumed by a desire to just get cleaned off, keeps going until her arms and body are basically scraped clean of skin before she passes out from blood loss and dies. Even going by this show's standards for horrific deaths, this is one of the most mortifying moments in the show's history. However, it's not the worst. Finally, at the top of this pile of corpses, the gold, blood-filled trophy belongs to Sniffles, thanks to some mind control mutilation from the ants. For as graphic and horrific as the other deaths have been here, they are all at least supported, and the creators are not ashamed of how dark and bloody they can be. Tongue-in-cheek, however, not only do they say that this is the one where they say they went too far, but this caused the ants to be permanently removed from the series, period.
I want to meet the guy who thought up these cartoons.
That fact alone should be concerning, and in motion, it is just as horrifying. After the ants successfully evade Sniffles' android ant that he was controlling with his helmet, one ant decides to return the favor by reversing some wires on that ant android, now able to control Sniffles. Firstly, he forces Sniffles to shove several sharp razors into an apple before eating it, getting razors stuck in his mouth and teeth, making it a bloody mess. Next, they force his tongue down a paper shredder, tearing it before he's forced to pull it out, making it bleed heavily. Finally, the ant forces him to nail his tail down and use his newly shredded tongue to tie a canoe paddle around his anteater mouth, turning it like a propeller blade before letting go and letting it yank out all of his organs and bones as the propeller blade flies off with his tail, forcing Sniffles down onto the ground, going limp. It's even worse as he's forced to be doing this, crying and begging for it to end all the way. It's drawn out, extremely graphic, and mentally horrific, and it's easy to see why this is the one death the creators decided they maybe pushed too far, making it an easy pick for the most gruesome death in the series. Considering how Sniffles ate a prehistoric ant in Blast from the Past and got his ancestor to start eating ants accidentally, we can say that after somehow coming back from his death, Sniffles decided to go back in time and prevent ants from ever existing. I'd say he earned the right to do that after this.